Are you interested in becoming a permanent part of the channel or having a direct impact on the type of content that I create? Well, now you can check out the Alliteration Gaming Patreon. Throughout it, you're going to find a handful of different tiers that can include special perks like shoutouts on the supporter card at the beginning of all my videos, access to the private channel in my Discord, and the ability to watch all of my content on Patreon a couple weeks early and totally ad-free. On top of that, the different video tiers will let you commission videos directly from me. We can build a deck together, you can send me some gameplay to commentate, or even select a character for me to spotlight. You can also now join the Alliteration Nation by becoming a channel member on YouTube. Pledging your subscription here is going to grant you a same spot on that supporter card and access to that same Discord channel, as well as hook you up with a member's badge that levels up and access to emotes when I stream on YouTube. I'm going to have the Patreon link down below to check out, and the Discord should you want to join that. And if you want to become a channel member, the join button is what you want to hit. If you end up supporting my work in any way, thank you so much. I'm incredibly grateful, and I can't wait to provide you with more top-notch content at my trademark top speed. Now, let's get on to the video. Good evening, my dear viewers, and welcome to another Alliteration gaming video. My name's Levi, and it's finally time to make that video. Now, if you haven't noticed, I haven't really made any super competitive or meta focused content on the channel in a good 6 months or so. Basically we covered the Nationals deck lists and the Nationals meta and recapped all of that, simply because our prince, our king, Andrew Holder, was not here to provide us with the deck lists anymore. But after that, that type of content has basically been completely dormant on the channel. And I mean, there's a few reasons why. The main reason is that I just don't think that the format is super interesting, to be honest with you. We've kind of just lived in a world for a good while now where aggro is king, interaction is dead for the most part, and there's just turn to OTKs left and right nonstop. That's kind of been the dominant forces in the format for a good while now, and that just hasn't felt super duper interesting to talk about, and it's been a big demotivator for me to make that type of content. We used to churn out, tier list for every single format, ban list video here, meta discussion, meta talk, the good, the bad, and the aggro. I used to be really inspired to do a lot of things like that, but lately it's really just felt like a few super big aggro decks, namely the guy on screen right now at the head of it all, has been really choke holding the competitive scene for the game, and it's kind of what I'm here to talk about today. And truth be told, even this video wasn't something I super duper wanted to make. I've been avoiding it for a very, very long time now, but I think after the Oceanic RLE and all of the cries and screams for them to do something about Odro, I think it's finally time that I have to finally step up and actually put my 2 cents in. It's gotten to the point where it's at such a critical mass that it feels weirder to not say anything, to not put my opinions out there, as just as a creator and as a voice of the community in a lot of ways. That being said, this is going to be much more of a freeform video. I don't really have a script. I have a list of talking points and subjects, and I have a bunch of images that I'll kind of cycle through depending on what we're talking about at the time. But for the most part, this is going to be much more of just a sit down and chit chat with me type of video. So the main thing I want to preface this all with is that this is not a doomsaying video. I don't think the game is dying. I think there's much more to a game than a healthy competitive meta, and I'm not here to spread doom and gloom and naysay like crazy. I'm just here to be kind of realistic, because there just are blatantly some issues in the hyper-competitive aspects of our game that I really would like to see them deal with so that it can go back to being really, really deep and enjoyable and interactive. That being said, I do think that complaints when it comes to game design are really, really hard to structure and actually use. And so I want to talk a little bit about my philosophy when it comes to complaining about things in-game, especially for how you can take complaints and turn them into real feedback and real data that the people who fix the game, who make the game, who work on the game can use. Design team, this video is literally for you. Designers, balancers, whoever's job it is to create cards, to delete cards, to nerf and buff cards, to errata cards, so however you want to go about it, this video is for you guys. And so that's what I really want to talk about here, is my philosophy when it comes to complaining about things in game design. And what I mean by that mostly is that there's just always so many variables, right? You can say, oh, X character did this to me X times by drawing X cards, X games in a row, and it was a miserable time. But then you also have to ask, okay, well, how is his deck built? How was your deck built? What character were you playing? What cards were you playing? What cards were you not playing? If I take a character that has a really bad Recovery Girl matchup, and I play no answers to Recovery Girl within my main deck, and I never sideboard those answers, and I play 30 games into her, it's gonna be the most miserable time of my life, and I'm gonna want to quit the game. But you can't go and say that to someone on design and be like, hey, that's why you have to ban Recovery Girl, right? That's not constructive criticism. That's not feedback or data they can use. And as someone who's done a lot of game design in the past, I truly understand that. So I really want it to be understood that these complaints aren't really coming from like a personal place of bias in situations where X variables happen X amount of the time. None of that is having any input on what I'm about to say in this video. The core of these complaints, the core of everything I'm about to say comes from the fact that when I sit down to play the My Hero card game, Universus, whatever it is, at the most competitive end of it, I don't get to play the game very often. I play against Ojiro, I play against Jiro, I play against Tokoyami, I play against all of these really good decks, which happen to be all of these blowout OTK type of aggro decks, and I do not get to play the game. I have had countless games against all of these characters with tons of different decks, tons of different variables, and unless I am building the most like wall turtle deck in the world, it is so hard to consistently survive these guys' turn 2s or even their turn 3s, which is a little bit less of a problem, but really the turn 2s is what I want to talk about, the OTKs. Essentially, it's so hard to consistently survive what these guys are doing because of their aggro output. It's so hard. Most of the time, if I lose the dice roll, I'm getting a turn to build and then I die. If I win the die roll, I'm getting a turn to build and then I get to poke them. Unless I'm playing my own OTK deck, then I get a chance to OTK them before they can kill me, and that's just not really a healthy back and forth, especially for what's supposed to be the top end of your competitive, thought-intensive play. And basically I'm saying all of that because I'm trying to essentially justify why everything I'm about to say and my personal complaints should be taken super seriously, because they're not coming from a place of this one bad time or these 10 bad times when I was doing this and they were doing that or yada yada. It's that in numerous scenarios with countless different characters, countless different play styles, countless different deck choices, some super duper tailored to beat them, consistently I am not playing the game against these characters, and I don't think that is a very good thing. When I sit down to play Universus, I don't care if I get my butt whooped or if I hose my rival or if you have a really good back and forth in between. Regardless of what the outcome is, I want to end the experience feeling like I played the game. And yes, your high rolls will exist, your hot draws are going to exist, yada yada yada. Sure, it's going to happen sometimes, but the issue with these guys is they're doing it very consistently, and that's simply not how I should be feeling when I finish playing a game of Universus. I should not be feeling like I didn't play the game. I love this game deeply. I'm borderline obsessed with this game. Ever since the day I started playing it, I've been crazy about this game. And so my only real complaint at the end of the day about the game is that I do not get to play enough of it when I sit down to go play the game. It's also been like this for quite a while, right? Nationals was a pretty similar meta, right? We had Tokoyami and Jiro trying to do these same things. Kirishima 2 was a very real, like, hey, I can survive turn 2 deck, but also he was trying to greed you out on turn 2 pretty often himself, and we also cut the head off of him entirely. But then at the same time, Ojiro 2 just kind of picked up that exact same deck and started playing it in his place. If you're a defensive 7-hander that isn't Eraserhead, you don't have that minus speed on face, you're probably not surviving most of the aggro turns of these aggro decks. Shigaraki 3 is like this obviously very pushed character. Like, they clearly just threw a ton of stuff onto this character because they wanted him to be meta relevant, and he's just not. He's still just gonna go splat against a lot of the top end of the strategies. And so what can we do? Like, can we just get good? What are the actual answers to Ojiro 2? Well, it's really hard because Eraserhead is supposed to be this killer of Ojiro 2, right? You don't get to use your busted character, you just don't get to do it. Midnight should be fantastic at just like blocking him out and really good at hardcore backswinging him. Like, on paper, these guys read like they should be the answers to the equation that we're looking to solve. But then when you actually do things on paper, the thing you realize about every Ojiro answer is they all kind of come with the same caveat of, yeah, but if he wins the die roll, you die. If he draws hot, you just die. Like, the thing is that like Ojiro's ceiling and his max output is so great that it's hardly worth playing any kind of answer to him, because they all come with that very generous window of, even though on paper you should be beating this guy, a lot of the times he's just gonna win through whatever you're trying to do. And while I don't think that these decks should be like beating him 100% of the time, if you're gonna play an answer, right, if you're trying to make that meta call of there's gonna be nothing nothing but Ojiro, I'm going to play an Ojiro answer, it's got to actually be worth playing. You have to like at least be 50-50 in the matchup. But a lot of the time, there's just so many elements of him finding what he needs that it doesn't really matter, that it's hard to justify playing those answers. It's hard to make it worth it rather than just playing him himself. Just because like his hot draws, that's a term that this community really likes, is, you know, the hot draws. And I actually like almost hate that term in association with Ojiro, because it's hard to even call them hot because they're just so common. Like we say hot draws, but like a 50 card deck with 4 Student of the Art, 4 One with Nature, 4 Snack Time, 4 Back Alley Haymaker, you're just gonna find those cards in like the first, you know, 12 to 15 cards of your deck that you get to see. You will find those cards. It's just like his middle ground is still really good at beating what's supposed to be like the answers to him. So it's honestly very hard to say that like the community and the player base needs to level up to beat this guy, because we found all the answers. We found the things that are printed to be able to fight against this character, and they're just not good enough at doing it because of how good he is at doing his thing. So like, I'm really talking about Ojiro now, and the whole community is really talking about Ojiro now, but has this problem actually existed all along? So that's an interesting question, because in the past we've had Jiro and we've had Tokoyami. These I think have kind of been like, of recent times, the really big aggro characters. We also had Asui, but that was kind of a long time ago. People don't play this character as much anymore. She actually might still be just as problematic, but the main ones I want to focus on are Jiro and Tokoyami, especially for, you know, the last couple events. Tokoyami proved at both nationals that there was very little interaction in his gameplay. Jiro dominated the HLC. Sure, she didn't win, but the second place list literally put the deck together like the night before in the hotel room and had like almost no games on it. It should probably be said that these two are still absolutely insane and probably do need to get addressed in some way, but for the time being, Ojiro is just the bigger head at the totem pole. He is like one level above them as far as like immediate problem is concerned. There is definitely like a blanket aggro issue in the game, but Jiro and Tokoyami were a little bit more manageable. This guy is just like way too good at what he does. It's not a matter of the rest of the field not being defensively good enough. If we had characters or cards in the game that let us block Ojiro's like even the mid rolls of his turn 2s very consistently, the game would be just as toxic, just defensively slanted rather than aggro. Please do not show me the character that can block +3/+3 on like 5 attacks. I don't want to see that character. So if we can't get good ourselves, what can we do? Well, we have to turn our heads to Jasko. We need to pray to the Jasko overlords to help us out here, because this is not the first time something like this has happened. Back in the heydays of the OG Set 1, the Kirishima 1 meta was absolutely infamous. It was way too much, and we needed Jasko to come in with the ban hammer on this guy and errata him, basically banned him. Basically banned him with how hard they errated him. And I think like that's one of the big things too is, you know, this was definitely like the worst time for the game, right? It was very easily and widely agreed upon that this was the worst meta that we had seen because of just how like dominant this guy was. One of the biggest things that a lot of people have pointed out is that at the Oceanic Regional, Ojiro 2 was in top cuts on all 3 of his symbols, and that is not something that has happened since Kirishima 1. We needed Jasko to come in. Then after that, I'd say probably the next worst thing we had was the Asui 1 meta. Basically right before the Momo meta, you know, right before they banned like Frog Lashing and Amphibious, this character was so insanely dominant and providing some very uninteractive game plans and some very consistent hardcore turn 2s, right? You know, we had always kind of seen this character doing a little bit of that. It really got optimized with like the Master Asia list. And once again, we needed Jasko to come in and bring the hammer down to bring this deck in line. And then we had Kirishima 2. He wasn't quite as oppressive. He was just like a really easy invite more than anything. He wasn't quite like as dominant, but they also still totally chopped his head off. And I think Ojiro 2 is just the next of these that we need Jasko to come in and intervene with. It's very clear that he's a problem. The issue is, what do we do about him? Now I've seen a ton of ways. Straight up, you could just ban Student of the Art. You could just do that. I've seen Ojiro do really putrid things without this card. I honestly don't think that's quite enough. I think the character probably needs to be touched somehow. You know, people say you can make him give speed or damage. They say say you can make him give just damage. You know, they can make him commit for cost. They can deal with his other card. Maybe we could finally see things like the back alley haymaker ban. We could see the one with nature ban. You know, there's a lot of different things that they could do to bring Ojiro in line. However you want to do it is fine. That's not really what I'm here to figure out. This is not like I've figured out how to solve the format. These exact changes will save the game. This is not really that kind of video. I will leave this to the professionals to decide how they bring Ojiro in line. The point being, something needs to be done to bring him in line. Now, another really big question is, where does that leave us afterwards, right? If we cut off the head of this snake, what is going to grow back and take its place? Right, that's like really hard to talk about, but I'm going to do the best I can. So if you look at it, right, Kirishima 2, he got decimated. Ojiro picked up like the exact same deck. And I think it's really starting to become more of a symbol issue than anything, at least when it comes to this scenario. Obviously, Ojiro as a character should be dealt with, but I think you have to go a little bit beyond that, right? Like, how many characters are we going to have to go through to realize that, like, Back Alley Haymaker, One with Nature, Snack Time, Hardened Jab, Seizing the Advantage, Chivalrous Competitor, all of those cards in the same deck are just not okay. The Earth symbol in general probably just needs to get looked at heavily, or else if we just hit Ojiro and do nothing else, I think there's a very solid chance that some other Earth character can pick up this exact same deck, and it's still going to be probably just too good. If we only deal with Ojiro and not a lot of the cards inside of his main deck, I think we're just going to have that trickle down effect again. We also talked about them earlier, but Tokoyami and Jiro, these two characters did not get any weaker since Nationals or since the HLC. Ojiro just took what they were doing, what made them so strong, that uninteractive turn 2 type of gameplay. He just took that and did that style quite a bit better. So if he goes, I think these two are just going to be the next hottest complaints. So let's say they also hit those two, right? Then where does that leave us? Well, that's when it gets even more complicated, because if you take away the best 3 aggro decks in the format, there's a very real chance that we just start living in a complete defense world again. That could mean the return of the Momo meta. It could also just mean that Eraserhead is like unkillable now. It could also mean that now that the decks that can't do 30 damage in one go are gone, you know, the mid-range stuff like All Might 3 could be a massive menace. Maybe in a world where Shigaraki 3 gets to turn 3 every time he's this control monster, it's really hard to balance like these preemptive style hits. You know, you don't want to ban like 10 cards at once because that looks kind of bad, but if you just ban Ojiro 2, we're probably going right back into Tokoyami and Jiro Nats HLC land, because the meta has not changed very much since then. Set 4 brought a ton of new characters into the fray. Shigaraki 3 is probably the closest to breaking in whatsoever, but as for everyone else, they're cool, but they're just not enough, especially compared to like the beasts that are the Set 1 characters. So what should they actually do? I mean, it's a really hard place to be on either side of. Truth be told, I'm really not sure. If I had the answers, this would be a very different video. This is much more just kind of like an open discussion, more of an awareness video than anything actually. Just like a very blatant awareness of something needs to happen regardless of what side they go. I want them to be heavy-handed about it, to be honest. I'm tired of feeling like every single meta needs a how do we save this meta video. I think it's getting really nauseating, and at this point I just want something definite and concrete. So let's talk a bit more about both sides of that equation and the extreme ends of it. The first one being just nuke the format. Just nuke the format. You can ban a ton of super powerful, super nutty staples and stuff. Just slaughter everything, usher in a new revolution, a brand new game. Banning so many cards is kind of messy. Maybe there's a world where you can even rotate out Set 1. I could name like 20 cards from Set 1 that removing from the game would just make super duper interesting. And that's not even counting characters. That's not even counting characters. Set 1 is just way stronger than everything else, and it kind of stifles the game a lot, especially with a lot of the design, right? I think a lot of Set 1's design makes a little bit like of a mockery of how deep this game is, because all of the aggression in Set 1 is very free, and it's all about cheating game mechanics. Your deck is important and relevant if it's actively deleting progressive difficulty as a mechanic. And it's just kind of lame, and so I think maybe we could see some kind of like a mass nuclear solution. This kind of also negates the whole trickle down issue, because you're just ushering in like a completely new format because the power level would shift so much. On the downside though, none of that is probably very realistic at all, because you are destroying everyone's collection values and people are just going to widespread quit. That's something like I don't personally care a lot about. I would be very sad, my wallet would be very sad, but if you have to nuke my dollar signs to save the game, to save the format, to make playing the game competitively fun again, I am personally okay with that, but that is very much the minority camp, I'm quite sure. So I think the negative ramifications for that are probably just way too big. So what is the other extreme alternative? I think there's a world where you can make a very hardcore but very fair ban list. Ojiro obviously has to go somehow. Do that however you want, fix him however you want. Past that, I do think that no matter what happens, Jiro and Tokoyami probably both need to see some kind of erratas. I understand that you might not want to preemptively ban too many things, but these two clearly need some looking at after Nats and the HLC metas. You don't need to eviscerate them like the poor Kirishimas of the past. They don't really need that treatment. I want them to still be very playable, and I'm fine with them being quite strong, but you just need to actually balance them somehow. Now, past characters, the Earth and Chaos symbols probably just need to lose some cards. Outside of Jiro, I don't think air is really a problem, but Earth and Chaos probably just have too much going on for them. Earth could probably just stand to lose a ton of cards. Basically all the ones we mentioned earlier, Back Alley Haymaker, Hardened Jab, Seizing the Advantage, One with Nature, Chivalrous Competitor, Snack Time. Like you could delete a couple of any of these, and I think it would really bring the symbol in line. And Chaos I feel very similarly about. Electric Jolt could easily go, Gravlift could go, Indiscriminate is like super not okay. They also share Chivalrous and One with Nature. They could lose those. Some of their zeros could be hit, Requesting, Release, Basic Training, all the ones that make those like hardcore, like build 6 turn 1 and then kill you strategies. Losing some of the zeros there would make a big impact. Twisting Azure Inferno is like not played by every Chaos deck, but it is kind of like way too good when it's in a deck that it's free in, which is like the good ones. Again, you don't have to do all of these. This is not like a specific ban list video. Of course, any like 2 or 3 of those going could easily have some huge ramifications and open up the format quite a lot. I just think that those characters and those symbols are quite stifling right now. You gotta knock Ojiro, Jiro, and Tokoyami down a peg, and you have to bring Earth and Chaos in line. I think that's kind of like the reasonable balance between, only touching Ojiro, which I don't think is very good, and nuking the format, which is also has a lot of really nasty drawbacks. I think that like some kind of ban list like that is a perfectly okay middle ground. Now, yes, that is just very blatantly hitting nothing but the best 3 aggro decks. Is that going to have huge defensive ramifications on the game? It is quite likely. Games will go to turn 3 and turn 4 very often, which I think is okay. I think that's ideal. I feel like we should be playing that much of the game almost every game. Now, the other possibility is that we enter Momo meta again, where we go to turn 15 and we build Grey Wars every single game into time. Does that definitely happen? I'm not quite sure. It's possible that a list like this should come with some like precautionary Momo hit as well, or maybe something else, but I don't know, that feels still really preemptive. I think it's just genuinely okay to hit those 3 top dogs and then just see what happens. I think it's more likely that a lot of like cooler and interesting aggro decks kind of come out of the woodwork because there aren't just like these blatantly superior options anymore. What I do think is definitely a factor though is I think that design is probably very scared of Grey Wars coming back. As crazy as Ojiro is right now, I still don't think that the mass complaints have gotten worse than when we were in like the Momo meta. And that's not to say that what we're in right now is better. It's just more so the fact that the guy who played the game for 15 turns with Momo and didn't get to play the game is going to complain way louder than the guy who played 1 turn with Ojiro and didn't get to play the game. Those are 2 very similar but very different experiences, and I think that's really what design is afraid of, which I kind of hate because that's not really how that works. I feel like that's just not how that works. If you give me 15 turns to figure out how to win the game, as opposed to giving me 1 turn to figure out how to win the game and counter your strategy, I'm more than likely finding options in the 15 turn game plan. You just have to make sure that as designed, you have to ensure that those answers actually exist. right? You have to make sure that those things exist. If people don't want to put them in their decks, that is on them. But there were tons of ways to put cards in your decks that counter Momo and find those cards by that many turns into the game, because that character was not threatening to lethal you out on turn 2 like a lot of, you know, the Ojiros and the Tokoyamis of the world are. And so I think that's kind of the biggest differentiating factor between complaining about that meta as opposed to this meta. But I do think that from a design perspective standpoint, they're a lot more afraid of those types of complaints, which is why we might see them you know, much more afraid to hit aggro as they do defense. I mean, I think, you know, as much as, again, he was greeting people out on turn 2, Kirishima 2 was the survive turn 2 character in a lot of ways. That's why he was so good, is you could go against Tokoyami and go, you probably cannot OTK me. You just probably can't. And, you know, Kiri 1 was the same way. Both of these guys got their absolute entire heads chopped off, while, you know, the Tokoyamis and the Asuis, we've seen them skate around these hardcore character erratas by just, you know, banning and touching some of the cards inside their main decks, which is consistently proven to just not be enough. This is, of course, just theory. I just think that might be why we've seen, you know, such underhanded tactics and such heavy-handed tactics when it comes to those two sides of the bar and what they might be kind of afraid of bringing into the game. I think characters like Momo and Eraser just like create this feeling of like locking you out of the game because they can block you so effectively. You have to think much more about how to attack them. It's a much more interactive process, and that can feel like that, but hard control really does not exist in this game in the first place, just because of the way it's designed. And not being able to kill Momo for 15 turns is just always going to be way different than Ojiro killing you on turn 2 before you could even think about figuring out how to do anything. So I truly think it's okay to just worry about hitting those top 3 decks right now and then just seeing the ramifications, you know. And if those decks do get out of hand, cool, you errata Momo, you errata Eraserhead, right? You do whatever you have to do from there. But I think that the fear of the game falling into a defensive format again is not enough to warrant, you know, just never actually putting a heavy-handed aggro ban list out there. So that's what I would kind of like to see them do. I also think that there's a world where all they do is touch Ojiro 2, and then in a couple weeks we go right back to complaining about all the Tokoyamis and all of the Jiros that we forgot were killing us in almost the exact same ways, just a little less consistently. If all they do is touch Ojiro 2, I'm going to be a little disappointed and lose a good bit of faith in where the minds of balance are, but I'm optimistic. I think that without Ojiro 2, Tokoyami, and Jiro in the picture so hardcore, the format becomes super healthy and wide open. Even just taking Ojiro out of the equation makes things just have so much more breathing room. But I'd really like to see them finally be heavy-handed about something other than a defensive character so that we can stop having these conversations every single meta. Anyway, that's kind of it for this video, guys. That's just kind of me vomiting my thoughts about how I've been feeling about the competitive scene of the game for a good while now, why you haven't seen a ton of competitive content, and what I would like to see them do moving forward, especially with the rest of the competitive season, you know, like right around the corner, well on the way. I do want to see them implement some changes because I just don't really see anyone excited to play this format right now, and it really brings down a lot about these events if the competitive side of this game isn't so thought intensive and interactive as it should be, as the design of this game, the mechanics and the gameplay tells us it should be. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you felt that my insight was insightful and if you learned anything from it, I would love some positive feedback down below, and I would also love to hear your own thoughts down below. Tell me what you think they should do to fix the game. I would love to see you guys go into certain specifics that I didn't go into. You know, that's the type of stuff that I would love to hear about down there, and I would love to open up that discussion for everyone, because it can, as long as we discuss, you know, in a civil manner, constructively criticize, I think it can only be positive, and it can only be healthy for the game. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I hope I can see you in the next one.